Welcome to the last video of Begin the Book on Your Bucket List. If you haven't watched the first 3 or 4, then it's time to get your booty back and start from the beginning with part 1. If, however, you're like, nah, I don't need those, I just want to jump in here, that's okay too. I can't stop you. Today we're talking about what is your story. Understanding what your story is a great place to begin before you actually sit down and put pen to paper, writing out chapters and working on a first full draft. Before we go into it though, I want to remind you, in case you didn't catch it in any of the other videos on this channel, I'm Allie. I'm the owner and lead writer over at The Right Place, Right Time. I'm a coach and a ghostwriter for women ready to brave the path to the page and tell their stories. Okay, so let's say you've gone through all these other videos. You've explored your idea. You now understand what your why is. You know who your reader is. Awesome. But do you know what your story is yet? Now, the thing that I want to make sure that you understand is that understanding what your book is about, understanding what the story is versus the situation, and these are very different, is important because it's going to help shape the manuscript as you begin to draft it. So, what's your book about? Number 1, if you've understood what your motivation and your reasoning is, there might be a key to what your book is about inside that motivation. If your reason, for example, is that you really want to tell the story of how your parents met and the adventures that they went on, then you know that to some extent your book is about family stories and family legacy. It doesn't mean that is the story, but it gives you an indication of where to go. Having explored your idea thoroughly in the exploration stage also should have given you a few clues as to what your story is about. Knowing your reader and who you're hoping to reach and what message you hope for them to receive is also a key part of understanding your story. And if you need help with any of those things, go back and watch the other videos in this series. Now, the one thing that your story must have is a universal element. A universal element is the thing that's going to relate to your readers. It's the thing that even if they didn't experience all of the exact moments and things that you did, they still understand your story on a visceral kind of perspective, a human perspective. Your story could be about hope or forgiveness or redemption. These are universal elements. These are the things that are the underpinning of your story. They're the emotional undercurrent that carries the work. So even if your readers haven't been through the exact same things that you have, they still can relate to your experience because they relate to the universal element which the story is about. So there's a thing in the writing world that we call the story versus the situation, and Vivian Gornick wrote a whole book on it. Essentially what it means is that the story is the emotional thing that happens and the situation is the context around it. So for example, let's just use The Wizard of Oz, and I'm using it because I love that movie, I love the book, and I'm actually working on a puzzle right now that's The Wizard of Oz, but let's just use that as an example. The story there is about Dorothy wanting to find her way back to family and belonging and home, right? But the situation is that she lands in a foreign place called Oz and all of a sudden has to defeat a wicked witch in order to get where she wants to go, right? So story is about home, belonging, journey, coming of age, right? Situation is Oz, Kansas, the house falls on the witch, the ruby red slippers, etc., etc. You can see how these two things are separate. One helps the other out. What you choose to share in your manuscript of the situation is going to shed light and provide context for the story you're trying to tell. No matter what, you're going to need to pick and choose what to share. You cannot put every single detail of your life or every single detail of a particular circumstance, situation, experience into the book. It needs to be about what helps the story propel forward. In short, you can't throw everything and the kitchen sink into your book. You have to make some decisions. You have to filter and sift. So be focused again on your audience and remember what it is that they need to hear from this work. While it might be a book about your own life and your own experience, it's not enough for it to be about what's meaningful to you. Your book needs to relate back to the people who are reading it, and that's exactly why the universal element is so important. The other thing that's interesting is knowing what your book is about helps you decide what kind of book you are writing. So, if your book is about a strategy or a framework or a particular theory or perspective that's unique to you or somewhat unique to your business, then you might be writing a business book, right? And a business book would lend itself to a different way of writing. If you know that you want to teach people something, then you might be writing something that's more academic. If you know that your book is more about, let's say, your life or a family member's life, then this is something that's more autobiographical or memoir or book of essays, creative nonfiction. That also lends itself to particular types of structures and things that you can study, books that you can read to get a handle on how you should go about your book. So, knowing what your story is can be very helpful in providing you the next key to how to get going when you actually sit down to pen the page and put some words to your manuscript finally in motion. So, I hope that this information is helpful. I hope it gives you a sense of what you need to do next before you actually start drafting that manuscript. And I encourage you again to watch the other videos if you haven't watched them prior to this one. And of course, to come and visit me at therightplacerighttime.com and to pick up my latest free lead magnet, which I plop down into the description of this video. Good luck in getting your book started.